The Sherlock Holmes Advent Calendar. The Redeemer's Coming by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Peter Silverleaf. 22. The Covenant of Evil. Quickly taking Holmes's leg injury into account, we marched through the corridors of the Abbey. We passed the lavatory where two Franciscans stood shaking their heads in front of the distant plank, and the chapel where a monk carpenter was busy building a new confessional box. But we only took notice of this on the sidelines and remained focused. Finally, we stood at the door of the office room and entered without further delay. Brother Francis sat behind his desk, his arms folded in front of his chest. "Gentlemen," he said, "I was already waiting for you." "We're not here to say goodbye," I replied. The abbot nodded slowly, only saying, "I know." "Then you might know," Holmes provocatively suggested, "that we found Maria Taylor." The remark did not fail to have any effect. Brother Francis jumped up and exclaimed excitedly, "Where is she? What did you do with her?" Holmes remained calm, saying, "She is safe, especially from you." "That's unfortunate," Brother Francis replied as he approached us, his walking stick in hand. "I wish you hadn't. I wish you had just left after the death of Brother Peter. Then we would be spared a lot." "Prison is what you will not be spared of," I replied defiantly, "and if I have a say in it, the gallows are waiting for you." The abbot shook his head. "Your enthusiasm in honor, Dr. Watson," he said calmly, "but you misunderstand the situation. I'm not going anywhere." With these words, Brother Francis suddenly pulled a revolver from the sleeve of his cowl and pointed it at us. I wondered if we should pull out our firearms now, because after all, the old man would not be fast enough to shoot us both. But Holmes guessed my mind, looked me in the face, and shook his head. I sat down. Instead, I said, "You will never get away with it, Brother Francis. Your plan has failed. You have failed. Deservedly, because you are nothing but a heretic who has fallen away from faith." "Don't insult me," the abbot shouted, grasping his stick at the bottom and slapping the metal knob in my face. "And do not insult God's plan." Shortly dazed, I inevitably fell to my knees. I grabbed my left cheek and noticed that I had suffered a bleeding wound. Immediately, I straightened up again. "Haven't you spilled enough blood with your walking stick yet?" I asked. "That was the weapon you used to kill Brother Emmanuel and Brother Nicholas, wasn't it?" This presumption was true, because Holmes nodded approvingly to me, but Brother Francis ignored that question. "If I could ask for your weapons now," he continued, "or did you come here without them? Take them out very slowly and throw them behind you." Again we looked at each other, and Holmes wordlessly told me to follow the instruction. So we did as ordered. Holmes took his revolver and placed it on the floor, and then pushed it backwards with his foot toward the door. I did the same with my pistol. I wasn't comfortable with it, but I trusted that Holmes had a plan, and that was the case. "Brother Francis," he began in a calm voice, "you have no chance. Give up. Today the papal delegate will appear in the monastery. What do you want to tell him?" "Let that be my concern," the abbot replied, unmoved. "You will no longer be concerned with this issue." "Cardinal Fosanova will see through you," said Holmes, now a little louder. "He will get behind the secret of the Abbey and hold you accountable, because you are a sneaky murderer, a kidnapper and arsonist, and a mean, vile rapist." The provocation worked, and once again the abbot pulled out his walking stick to beat Holmes. But he was prepared for it. He quickly dropped and rolled to the side, causing the stick to go nowhere. In the same move, Holmes hit Brother Francis's leg with his crutch, causing him to fall. His revolver flew above the desk and landed far away on the ground. Now we were all unarmed. For fractions of a second we thought about what to do. It should be possible for me to overpower the fallen abbot with my superior physical force, but I turned around to pick up my pistol again. But I was not going to get that lucky, because at that very moment the door opened. Reverend Blake stepped in, made a surprised face, and almost stumbled upon my weapon. He picked her up and said, "But, gentlemen, what's going on here?" I sighed in relief. "Thank God you're here, Father," I cried. "Brother Francis is the real perpetrator. Point the gun at him." But Holmes shook his head. "Don't try, Watson," he said. "He's not going to do anything like that." "But why?" I stammered without understanding. "Because the Reverend is Brother Francis's accomplice," Holmes said. I was completely flabbergasted and looked at the Anglican priest. "Is this true?" I asked with uncertainty. Reverend Blake ignored me and turned to Holmes. "All respect, Mr. Holmes," he said, "it seems to me that you are quite rightly a famous detective." And with those words he actually pointed the gun at us. The abbot rose laboriously and grabbed his stick again. "You shouldn't have done that, Mr. Holmes," he growled. "But now you can also tell us, how did you find out about this?" "Your ecumenical covenant of evil," said Holmes mockingly. "Quite simply, you could hardly have done some things on your own, for example, the affixing of the vicar's body to the cross. You had to have had an aid, an accomplice. However, you had to trust him unconditionally, for which a decades-old friendship is a good basis. Of course, you both shared the desire to bring back Christianity into people's minds. The idea of creating a new Messiah was probably born a long time ago, because it is the daring, revolutionary idea of young people, not the plan of older masters. For a long time, only the appropriate Immaculate Virgin, the coming bearer of God, was missing. Reverend Blake came across the story of Maria Taylor in his community and had to wait until she was of childbearing age. And when her brother was abroad for longer, the time had come. He killed the sheep to destroy their livelihoods and advised Maria to turn to the abbey at Twickenham for help, only until Simon returned. That's when she fell into the trap. "But why did the Reverend help me when I was in Teddington?" I asked. "Maybe he just didn't want to be suspicious," Holmes replied, "or he already knew that with Brother Peter they already had a suitable scapegoat at hand, which could be presented to us as the perpetrator. In any case, the Reverend's guilt is no less than the one of the abbot. They are brothers in spirit and partners in crime." "It is always good to have a reliable companion," confirmed the abbot. "Speaking of which, I suppose your colleague Lestrade is hiding somewhere in the monastery with our God-bearer and the fruit of the Messiah." "You won't find them, you sick madman," I replied unruly. But Brother Francis smiled superiorly. "So, I'm right. Good to know," he commented as I bit my lips. "And what happens to us?" I asked, another question in the room, although the answer had long been clear to me, apart from any details. "I fear," said the abbot calmly, "they will both tragically perish. Actually, you should know that in the case of a fire, you do not flee to the top. Unfortunately, however, you have no other way than to go on the roof and on to the platform above the main gate. And when you are finally trapped by the flames and have no way out, you desperately jump from the battlement into the depths. This death seems worthy enough to me." "I'm not going to do any of this," I immediately objected. "As you wish, Dr. Watson," Brother Francis replied, smiling. "It would also be conceivable that after the fire you could find your charred body here in the office room. Of course, you won't see a gunshot. Do you prefer that?" "No, thank you. I can do without that," I replied. "But I would have one more question. What kind of fire is this that you are constantly talking about?" "The fire they're going to set somewhere in the Abbey," Holmes said. "They want to force Lestrade and Maria to come out of their hiding place because they need the girl alive." "Not anywhere," the abbot corrected. "In the library." "Of course, where else?" agreed Holmes self-critically. "But otherwise completely correct, Mr. Holmes," Brother Francis confirmed. "It is extremely regrettable that the career of such a successful detective must now come to an end." "It won't. Never," I cried combatively. But Holmes gave me a look of reproach and said, "Leave it, Watson. It's just silly." "You just don't want to give up?" I asked indignantly, but Holmes did not respond. I left it at that, hoping that he would be busy devising a plan for our salvation. But now the abbot had taken Holmes's revolver, which meant that two weapons were now aimed at us, at least for now. "Gentlemen," the Reverend said to us, "as stimulating as the conversations with you are, I have to say goodbye now. I still have work to do in the library." The Anglican priest nodded to his Catholic accomplice and was the first to leave the room. For the time being, we were left alone with the abbot, who of course had to give the Reverend a little time for his task. I was boiling on the inside, thinking about this barbaric act that Reverend Blake would now undertake. Centuries-old manuscripts, irreplaceable individual pieces, and thousands of books with all the knowledge of humanity were to become a victim of the flames. An unforgivable atrocity. But then I understood that we too would become the helpless victims of the coming great fire. I must confess that my own fate worried me more than that of the library and the rest of the Redeemer's Abbey. I also wondered if Lestrade would be careful enough not to fall into the diabolical duo's trap. But my optimism was limited. "Holmes," I whispered, "if you still have a trump card, then now would be the right time to play it." "Silence!" the abbot, who was still aiming at us with my friend's revolver, ordered us. "I'm fed up with your chatter, Dr. Watson. It will be a special joy and satisfaction to see you die first." Long minutes passed without a word. We stood there with our hands raised, who slowly got heavy, Brother Francis facing us with gun ready. No one had to wait for his death in greater boredom than Holmes and I. Then the abbot finally said, "It's time, gentlemen. Time for your last journey." With these words, he pointed the revolver toward the door, and we slowly set in motion, like sheep being driven to the slaughterhouse.